Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast with your host, Raghunath, and super duper co-host, Kaustubha Das from the Bhakti Center in New York. Welcome, changing it up. Okay. Welcome to the show. You know why? Sometimes when you do things over and over again very rotely, you forget the substance behind it. And I just wanted to say, yes, senior educator at the Bhakti Center, all that. And I say it, and sometimes I don't think, but super duper co-host and senior educator. Welcome to the show, and welcome to Sleeping Sunday. It's all good.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that the chat board is like talking about how young and healthy you look. Have you seen that?
Me?
Yeah.
I thank the
Wellness
Makeover Monday people. I did my cleanse. I did my cleanse. I jogged for 45 minutes this morning. I've been like having no white sugar in my body for 6 weeks now.
That's why you were judging me a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I was just joking. You know me. I would drink glasses of Glub-Jumming syrup at this time last year. Okay. Drink it was like spring water. Okay. But I'm born again. I got the good news. Anyway, it's Sleeping Sunday. If you're listening to this on Facebook, we do this every day. You can join us every day here on Zoom. You just got to email Mara for the secret codes to get on Zoom. We just don't let anybody just come on in here. You got to chant one round a day. If you're listening to this on Zoom right now, one round a day, we commit to that. If you don't, I want you off the show. I want you unplugged. I want you ending the conference. Yeah, I drive it tough. I have tough standards here.
I'll sneak you back in.
I check the waiting room on a regular basis to see who's waiting in there, lounging around, trying to hop.
Maybe they chanted
Zoom
around
fence.
and they came back.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Could be. Right.
Who would know? You think I won't know? I'll know.
Yeah, right.
I'm like Santa Claus. I know who's been good and bad. So, anyway, we do this every day. You can join us. And then we go out to the masses with Apple Podcasts. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, tell us you're listening and write us a review. And we love to hear from you. Tell us your story. Today on Sunday, we do it a little later in the day. It's 8 o'clock, and we have special guests. And today we have a very special guest. Mm-hmm. He's a professor, Professor Matthew Dasti, who we know as Mahamuni, the great, which is a name for Vyasadeva, right?
It is.
Mahamuni, the great thinker.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Welcome to the show, Professor Matthew Dasti.
I got to unmute Professor Master Dasti. I've asked him to unmute. You got to unmute yourself now. He's on it.
I think we crossed paths with the unmuting.
Welcome.
Oh yeah, you start like unmute. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me over.
Let me just hit the official bio for a second here. Matthew Dasti is a professor of philosophy at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts. His teaching centers on the major traditions of thought that developed globally in the axial period. Did I pronounce that correctly, Professor?
You did.
Okay. Which is roughly between the 8th and 3rd centuries BCE. Non-Western traditions of philosophy in particular, and philosophical topics like epistemology and the philosophy of religion. And Matthew's research centers on the major schools of classical Hindu philosophy, especially early Nyaya. All right?
Yep.
Nyaya.
Okay, and so why don't we start there?
Sure.
That there's well, why don't you explain to us what Nyaya is?
So, when people encounter philosophy in India, sometimes there's a group of schools spoken of as the six schools of Indian
Yeah.
thought. Have you guys heard of that before?
Six
Raghunath?
classical schools.
Yeah, the six schools.
Sadarshans.
Yeah, the Saddarshanas, right?
Come on, Mooney.
Well,
You
hey,
think I'm entirely uneducated?
I'm
here?
just, this is me. I'm helping you teach others by pretending to be a student.
Oh, okay.
But
But
we
if
know
you want
each
to
other.
quiz
by
us,
the way.
we like challenging each other with trivia and quizzes.
All right.
Can you name the 6 schools, Kaustubha?
I believe I can.
Yoga,
Go.
Nyaya.
Well, have
Vedanta,
it. No.
Yeah,
Come on, no,
Vedanta.
stop. You have to,
Sankhya.
stop. You have to name them as couplets because there's
Oh,
three schools that are connected.
Okay,
There are
that's a
three
little extra
couplets that
challenge.
are connected.
Yeah, 3
All
couples.
right, I'm already stumped. I thought I was doing really
All right,
good
so let's-
there.
I think I can do that. Yoga and Sankhya,
Correct?
Vedanta and Nyaya.
Nope.
Really? Vedanta,
Vedanta and
Karma
Mimamsa. That's right.
Okay, sorry, Vedanta.
By the way, we have to,
Karma-yogi.
like, the three of us could joke the whole time and people won't benefit from it so much. So
Right.
you're
Okay, so
right,
go
though.
ahead.
Vedanta and Mimamsa. And what's the last group?
And then Vaisheshika
And Nyaya, right.
and Nyaya.
So the short story is this. In India, in classical India, when you talk about philosophy, people often think about distinct schools of thought. And those schools of thought were bound by their core theses or their core holdings, and also their core views of things like, how do you understand the world? What's the goal of life? And basically, how do you break the world down into fundamental categories? So you had different schools. Now, the so-called 6 schools of Hindu thought are one kind of way to make sense of those schools, but honestly, there were far more. 6 schools is a misnomer. I mean, you have Kashmiri Shaivism, for example, right? That's not one of the 6 schools, but it was a really important tradition. You had all sorts of Buddhist traditions that aren't listed there that were also really important. But what I'm getting at is, when you say, like, what is Nyaya? So Nyaya is one of the so-called 6 schools that its core idea was, if you want to live the best life you can live, and by the way, Nyaya endorsed yoga practice, but it said, if you want to live the best life you can, that starts with a clear understanding of the world. In other words, practice cannot be separated from critical thinking, from logic even, and from making sure that your beliefs track reality. They don't just track what's convenient or easy to believe. So you might say that Nyaya pioneered what we would nowadays call critical thinking in classical India.
I see.
So that's really kind of where you can put it on the map. But what's also, Nyaya is also well known for the fact that it offered purely philosophical proofs for things like the self and for things like God, where, yes, Nyaya did accept, see, these 6 schools, they all accepted the Veda. These schools, by the way, were always learning from each other. Right? Like yoga borrows things from Nyaya. Early Nyaya, by the way, borrows a few things from yoga. That's just, this kind of interplay is part of classical India. But what Nyaya, so Nyaya not only did it pioneer kind of what you might call reasoning and critical thinking, but it also said things like, oh, do you think there's a self? We don't just have to rely on scripture or whatever. I can argue why there's a deep self.
Which
can
distinguishes it from Vedanta?
For the
in a
most
sense.
part. For the most part. But the thing is that what's important about Nyaya is that there's, frankly, I think there are certain misconceptions about Indian thought that come out of the way it happened to have been encountered by Westerners like us in the 20th century. So it's kind of like, if you don't mind me kind of starting with a little metaphor. So like, if you don't know anything, imagine you know nothing about France. Right.
I don't know very much at all.
That's fine. But but you know more than the person I'm imagining.
You don't have to imagine too much.
You know much about France?
It's a country in Europe. We'll start there. But just imagine you don't know anything about France, right? Yeah. So you meet one single person from France. You bump into them and you say, hey, what's France like? And so they tell you what France is like from their perspective, right? But this is just one person. Therefore, their own embeddedness in society, their own concerns, their own anxieties, their own hopes. That's going to color how they frame what France is, right?
Sure.
It doesn't mean they're lying or they're wrong, but it means that you cannot escape their perspective in how you're encountering this country right now, because they're your only authority. So in the same way, most of the people who ran into Indian philosophy in the 20th century tended to learn about it from people who are Advaita Vedantins. That is to say, a very distinct, specific school of thought in India that in many ways does not represent mainstream Indian philosophy. And yet it was presented as normative Hindu thought for Westerners, right? And
Even it seems not uncommon that when someone says Vedanta,
they mean Advaita Vedanta. Yeah. Exactly. And so what I'm getting at is, here's one of the things those people said. The true grandeur of Indian thought is not in thinking like you rational Westerners. It's in non-thinking. It's in non-discursive intuition, right? Now, by the way, just being. But you know what's really fascinating about that? The people saying this were in many cases very thoughtful people in India who were trying their best to think, what do we have the West doesn't have? We want to assert that. And they created a kind of image of Indian thought as if it was anti-rational, which is such a distortion. It's a complete distortion. There is no major Indian thinker except for 3 that I'm thinking of right now that aren't even aligned that well with with mainstream Indian thought. Every other thinker says, if you want to achieve moksha, if you want to achieve kaivalya, if you want to achieve nirvana, you have to think clearly and you have to be self-critical about how you frame your belief. You guys are yogis, right?
We try.
So in the Chitta Vrittis, what's the first?
Yes.
What's the first vritti?
Okay, you busted me right there. Raghu? Mara. I don't know which one to count first.
spaghetti?
Is it
Pramana.
clear
Pramana.
perception, right?
Pramana.
Correct. So the Chitta Vrittis,
I thought it was
the first one is clear understanding.
Yeah.
And by the way, remember the klittis can be klishta or aklishta. They can be helpful or not helpful.
Right.
It's not that every vritti is evil. So even the Yoga Sutra, which culminates in kaivalya, it culminates in a kind of pure immediate awareness of the self. How do you get there? Well, you get there by a clear vision of the roadmap. So what I'm getting at is Nyaya, this school that I've been spending the last decade or 2 of my life trying to understand, they really try to set out, especially for the other Hindu schools of thought, what's the kind of roadmap or what are the ways we adjudicate disputes about what's right or wrong or what's true or false? And you do by these things called pramana.
Okay.
And this is, by the way, pramana, like if I had my, you know, there's terms that have become like loan words into English. So you could say dharma, and at least a reasonably knowledgeable person would at least have a handle on it, you know, dharma or Brahman. So I'm hoping that pramana joins those terms at some point.
Working on popularizing
that's my
jumps over.
it's part of what I'm trying to do.
And so by pramana, you mean that there's some foundation by which we can actually determine what is true.
Not only determine what is true, but solve debates or disputes about it.
Right, based on it.
Yeah. And the
Sometimes
major
people just say proof.
that's one way to see it, but the you know, it's a little bit clunky, but I like to call pramanas knowledge sources. So what are the knowledge sources? Perception, inference, and testimony. Right?
Yes.
And so, you know, among the thinkers that we study, they tend to say, look, if something is true, whether it's sacred truth or whether it's ordinary truth, there's a pramana that supports it. And anytime you assert something, anything, someone could say, oh, cool, what's your pramana for that?
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, Nyaya kind of pioneered this. But you know, so the second sutra, the Nyaya Sutra, says that there's a chain, and that chain terminates in suffering. And Nyaya Sutra is an adhyatma. The Nyaya tradition is adhyatmic. It's concerned with spiritual transformation. What is that chain that leads to dukkha or suffering? Well, it starts with mithya jnana. It starts with misunderstanding. Misunderstanding leads to making choices about how to live that are harmful. Those choices, when you surrender to those choices, it perpetuates a trajectory through many births that perpetuates suffering. And so to stop suffering, you start by fixing the first part, which is mithya jnana, misunderstanding.
Now that right there sounds to me like I'll find the same ideas in Buddhism. I'll find the same ideas in Advaita Vedanta.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. That, like, in a way, this is why it was an unfortunate misrepresentation to act like having a clear understanding of reality isn't central to every Indian school, because it is.
Okay, but here's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
So, based on what you've said so far, and based on what little I understand about Nyaya in the past, my understanding was that Nyaya was going to answer Advaita Vedanta, or specifically, I thought Buddhism.
Yeah.
Concepts there, it was going to present a theism, drawing from Vedanta, or
No,
drawing
Vedanta's
from
after
the Vedas.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, Vedanta historically developed, like, Shankara's commentary, the first major commentary on the, Vedanta Sutra, is centuries after the early Nyaya work. So he's actually borrowing from them, believe it or not, in many cases, or responding to them.
But what I suppose what I meant was borrowing from the Vedic,
the kind of the Vedic
teachings.
tradition, you might say.
Yeah.
I think that's right. So Nyaya wanted to answer the call to defend things like the self, to defend things like Ishvara, or God, to defend things like, you might say, like mainstream Vedic values, in a way that it doesn't just appeal to some authority, but it wants to argue for them in a way that it would think any reasonable person should be able to accept it.
Okay.
Yeah. Did I answer you, or no? I didn't.
Yes.
You're right, though. Yeah.
Do you mind me jumping back a little bit? Like, how did
Anyway,
you
I'm just seeing this as
stumble-
a conversation. I don't have an agenda. Go for it.
Okay, good. How did you stumble into this, into Bhakti Yoga, and how old were you?
Into Bhakti Yoga. So I was one of those kids who, my buddies and I, when we were in our early to mid teens, thought we saw through the way of life outlined for us by our parents and society. And so we thought there's got to be more than this. And I was lucky enough that I still lived when you had used bookstores. And so one of the most fun things to do when I was a 14-year-old was ride my bike to the used bookstore and look at the philosophy and religion section and buy what I could and read it. And so I was reading Alan Watts. I was reading various translations of the Bhagavad-gita. And that kind of way of life was attractive to me. So I was lucky enough that when I was, 17, I became friends with a sannyasi, or a monk, who lived in India, and said, "Why don't you come to India and study Bhagavad-gita with me?" So that's what I did about 2 weeks after I graduated high school. Made my parents cry. It was awesome.
Yeah,
That was the awesome part.
I think we all have to make our parents cry. Once in a while.
But so that's kind of the background. So I've been reading the Gita since I was a teenager and attracted to it. And I bounced around ashrams and stuff like that for a few years, but I decided to go back to school, and that kind of set off the academic direction.
Can I ask you a question? Because I had this debate in my mind when I was a young Bhakti-yogi, because I even though I was courting other spiritual practices, I was not a deep religious scholar. But there was people from different. I would pick people's brains from different traditions, read different books, and then when I got into Bhakti Yoga, I was like, I get so much benefit from this: controlling my senses, controlling my mind, mantra meditation, kirtan, the culture of it. A few years in, I started to realize, actually, this is a very, very big thing. It's a very, very deep lake, so to speak. And there's all these different sects of it, like you were just speaking of.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, these people study this stuff for years.
Mhm.
I just sort of like stumbled upon it. What makes me think out of all of these things, I'm on the right path? I am getting some benefit, and I think all these things have some good benefit. I'm wondering if I ever went to school, to university, to really study objectively, would I still be on this path? Or as I study deeper, would I be like, oh, no, these guys are completely off? Did you find that your education got you deeper in your bhakti practice, or made you say, wait a second, what's going on here, and step back a little? Do
So
you understand that
yeah,
question?
I get it entirely. And it's true. Like I was someone who spent years practicing before I went to school. So it is something that the kind of, so short story is this. I think that studying philosophy only helps because you realize that if something can be defended if you can defend something reasonably, then it's worthy of following. And I think that the core holdings that I would associate with bhakti are things that are reasonable. Now, if you look at things from a history of religion perspective, you know, I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of things you hear in the ashram that you just believe, that you realize probably started 50 years ago, not 500 years ago. I'm just going to be honest with you. There's a lot of things that are passed on as tradition that are artifacts of the 19th and 20th century. That's just a fact. Now, does that mean
What is it? What am I doing wrong?
Like what? What are they? What should I be doing?
It's not. That's not exactly what I mean. But what I mean is that that is something you have to go through when you look at things historically. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of really core, deep, timeless sort of things that are worthy of following. I mean, from my perspective, Raghu, my own practice, I'm being frank with you, is an amalgamation of the Bhagavad-gita and Greek Stoicism. And I actually think that if you want to understand karma yoga, you should read Epictetus. That's my view. But so what I'm getting at is, for me,
I was a big fan of it.
Epictetus. Epictetus is awesome, man. Epictetus is my guru, man. He's the best. But what I'm getting at is
my guru.
He's one of them. But what I'm getting at is, for me, studying Epictetus, studying Plato, for that matter, studying ancient Taoism, that's all been things that have really inspired me, but not in a way where it's like, what's the one truth and every other truth is false? Come on. You know, it's more like, what's my core inspiration, and are there things that can augment that by being interesting perspectives, by being helpful perspectives?
Well, you know, I want to discuss Bhagavad-gita and Karma-yoga.
Yeah.
But before we go there, going back to Nyaya for a second.
Yeah, but actually, Kaustubha, I want to talk about Nyaya, but Raghu, are you satisfied with that, or do you want to go further? Because I don't like, like, this is just a chat.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
But I want to say something. May I say one other thing?
Sounds like it brought you full circle.
It did to some degree, but honestly, you know, it's always going to be disorienting to encounter something you see as your tradition as described through lenses that don't involve confidence in it. You know, so if you study something academically, the point isn't to reinforce your faith in it. The point is to kind of put it on the operating table and take it apart. So that could be disorienting. You know,
that makes sense. Yeah.
But
you say it sounds like it has been a little disorienting.
No, well, for me though, I mean, like, we've known each other a long time.
Yeah.
To me, I'm not a joiner. So for me, it's not like I was clinging to some one institution that I was worried about having faith in. For me, I was already like, hey man, I'm happy to break down trust in a lot of these things personally, because I have trust in the deeper principles.
Okay.
So it wasn't like I had to go to school to like be disoriented with that stuff. So anyway,
can I ask you a question about those? You were appreciating the Greek philosophers that augment your highest values. Did they borrow from India, or did they come up with their own thoughts completely on their own?
I think that they were. So the history of ancient Greek and Indian influence is really interesting. We don't have a lot of strong evidence. There's just suggestions. So one of the major strains of so-called Hellenistic, but we'll just say Greek philosophy, is skepticism. This is associated with a philosopher named Pyrrho. and later Sextus Empiricus and others. And they were people who basically, any view you had, they would try to argue for why it's unreasonable to hold on to it too strongly. They were really smart, by the way. They had really good arguments. Their founder was said to have gone to India with Alexander the Great and to have learned from, the term is gymnosophists. Gymnosophist means naked philosophers. Now, of course, that might make you think of Jainists or something, right? Like maybe the Digambara Jains were naked. Or it could have just been like
a lot of naked sadhus.
It's exactly. It could have just been some
Sukadev
tyagis.
Goswami,
Yeah, exactly.
Nityananda walked around naked sometimes.
So they actually have an origin story that says it goes back to India. But I'll just say to you, there are other arguments people make that certain elements of Indian thought were influenced by the Greeks, because there was a lot of it back and forth. So we don't really have anything clear. We just have a lot of suggestions. And so at that point, what happens is, based on their patriotism, people from India will say it comes from India, and people from Greece will say it comes from Greece. And I say, I'm not playing that game because it's stupid.
Whoa.
It all came from India. I guess.
Of course it did. Hey, you want to hear a great story, Raghu? I'm going to tell you a story.
Yeah, I love stories.
One of the most delightful Indian sadhus that you and I both know, or we knew, was a mailman in sacred Vrindavan.
Oh, Daduji.
His name was
Dadu.
He was one of the most amazing human beings I ever met, and I'm proud to say that my wife and I became very close to him towards the end of his life. And we were in a talk that was being given by a Western yogi and someone of some repute.
Okay.
And that Western yogi gave a whole class, and at the end, this Indian sadhu or saint, Dadu, said, Maharaj, I'd like to ask you, the conception of the soul, where did it come from? Did it come from India or the Greeks? Where did it start?
I would love to see him ask that question, because it's...
And this Maharaj, who I know personally and like a lot, but who is not a scholar of the history of religion, just said, well, obviously it comes from India. And this Indian sadhu said, no, I think it comes from the Greeks. This sadhu, by the way, was a Raganuga Bhakta, man. This is a very deep spiritual practitioner. What it showed me is, who cares? He didn't care. It's not like his faith depended on some story about the history.
Well, Raghu is a real subscriber
I
to all of
appreciate
those
that.
Instagram profiles that like defend Hindu Dharma and everything comes from India. You eat that stuff up, Raghu, right?
If it makes you feel better.
I do. I'm very, very
you do
lean
you
towards Indian
You do you.
politics.
I think though you'll find Raghunath.
But that was a good story. No, I get it though. I appreciate
Who
it.
cares?
Truth
In
is
other
truth.
words, there's a historical
I-
fact of the matter, and I'll tell you right now, with India and Greece, it's very murky. It's interesting, but it's murky. So why do people feel compelled to argue one or the other? It tends, to me, that seems like a weird sort of fanaticism.
Okay. Now,
My theory is people like to argue
That's
just
a
because
good,
they're arrogant.
that's fair, and we are, yeah, and we might too. I think there's also people. There may be people who want to defend India because they're sensitive to like a few centuries of Eurocentric cultural chauvinism, and they want to push back, and I understand that too. But to just to be chauvinistic the other way isn't helping either.
Okay, I want, because we don't have so much time, I want to make sure we talk Bhagavad-gita
Yeah, sure.
and
thing.
Karma-yoga.
Sure.
And I know that, the teachings of Karma-yoga, now it's being further revealed to me that these aren't coming solely from Bhagavad-gita for you, but they're coming from
Oh,
other sources.
but if I'm talking about the Gita, I'm not gonna sneak Plato into it. I promise. We'll keep it. We'll keep it pure for you.
But I know that personally, in your own practice,
yeah.
you've been inspired by the writings and the commentaries on Karma Yoga.
Very deeply.
Now,
actually.
can you, in Western yoga circles, the term Karma Yoga, in my mind, it's been misapplied or misunderstood. It can mean as little as like, hey, if someone volunteers to sweep up the yoga studio once a week, we'll give them a free class or something like that. And it's called Karma Yoga. Can you explain to us what Karma Yoga is?
Absolutely.
And also why it inspires you in your own practice so much?
Sure thing. And so I think if you picked up the Bhagavad-gita and you tried to wipe away as many preconceptions as you had when you read it, I think it would be very hard to come away with the Gita. It would be very hard to come away without having this view. In the Bhagavad-gita, Arjuna has to perform his responsibilities in life, but they're very hard for him, and he doesn't want to. And Krishna says, hey, listen, Arjuna, I know you're worried that if you act in the world, you're going to become entangled. But I'm going to teach you something, that you can act in the world and be completely free every moment of it. And this is what yoga is. And then Arjuna thinks, this is great. I'd like to do yoga so I don't have to act in the world. Yoga is great. Yoga, spiritual realization, awesome. That's what I'll do so I don't have to fight.
It's a type of escapism.
Exactly. And so much of the Gita is Krishna saying, if you do karma yoga, you achieve the fruit of whatever inactive yoga you want. And Krishna clearly says in the Gita, you perform karma yoga till you die. You don't graduate from it. And what's surprising to me, and like, we're old ashram guys, like we were often taught like, oh, this is this basic thing, but we're above it. This basic thing. Well, if you read the Gita, Krishna does not say that anywhere. Krishna says you do this until you do it your whole life. And so it seems to me as a guy, like I have a family, I have a job, and I'm in the world. And this book, the Gita, that's literally been the main book I've been reading since I decided to try to understand Indian spirituality. I thought, let me go back to it to see if, like, this is supposed to guide us in life, right? It's supposed to.
Yeah.
And so I found myself that if you understand karma yoga, it's a very powerful guide to actually live your day-to-day life.
Well, can you define karma yoga for us?
Sure thing. So first of all, karma means action, right? And yoga basically means a kind of contemplative practice. So sometimes, like with my students, I'll just say it's like the yoga of action, something like that. It's not that helpful, but the yoga of action. But karma means action. But when I if I wanted to break down what karma yoga is, could I put something in the chat?
Yeah, but
would it get lost?
Very few will see that amongst our listeners. But
I don't. This is for you guys.
Okay.
This is for our Sunday morning hangout.
All right.
Okay.
So if I wanted to summarize karma yoga, I'd summarize it with these three things.
One.
That was fast.
And we'll go through that. I copied it. I actually have. I was looking at my own karma yoga notes, thinking about it. So listen, you don't have to read it all, but I just have it there. I'm going to talk about it.
Yeah.
So the core thing about karma yoga is that Krishna says this is a way of action that's revolutionary. It's not like normal action. So what's the first thing that makes...
Before, because I love the way you're framing this, and I just want to see if I can further frame it too. Would you see the teachings of karma yoga in the Bhagavad-gita as a type of, not necessarily response to, but like it's building upon, and in some way responding to the teachings in the Upanishads, which may have been more purely contemplative and less action-oriented?
There's something to that, but I put it like this. And in ancient India, there was tension between two profound attitudes towards life. One of them is you should fulfill your responsibilities in the world, and that's called dharma. That's one attitude which was deeply understood and meaningful to people. Here's another attitude. You should transcend the miseries of life.
And in a sense, leave the world behind.
Well, those two things were both values that were held, but that did have tensions. Because if you want to transcend the world, well, what about making sure there's food on the table for my kids, right? What about making sure that my elderly neighbor across the street has somebody to help him sit up because he has Parkinson's, right? If I'm so concerned with transcendence, what about that, right? So these are real concerns, and the Bhagavad-gita is so profound because it says there's a way to respect both of these without short shrifting either of them.
In other words, I could be a full-on transcendentalist and still be a responsible.
Not only can you be, Kaustubha, you must be. The Gita says you must be. The Gita doesn't say it's a choice. Krishna says to Arjuna multiple times, neglecting your responsibilities out of some high-mindedness is not yoga. He actually calls it tamasic
Where does it call tamasic?
in the 18th chapter.
All right.
So,
So like say the first verse of the 6th chapter. This is kind of where you're getting.
you're
like,
right,
the
where he
real
says
yogi.
the real yogi. Well, but not only this, Kaustubhaji, in the first 6 chapters of the Gita, when Krishna defines yoga and just says yoga, he means karma yoga.
He means karma yoga.
Doesn't even say karma
Because he's
yoga.
juxtaposing it towards, I
Correct.
suppose, jnana yoga, right?
Well, but even that's fine. That's true. But when we translate things as karma yoga and jnana yoga, Krishna typically says yoga and sankhya.
Right.
Yoga is karma yoga. Sankhya is sitting in a cave and trying to disidentify with the vrittis.
Right.
And so,
And so he takes pains throughout the first 6 chapters to explain that not only that you get the same results from
correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
From being
and so
socially responsible.
exactly. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, for me as someone who takes the Gita seriously, and wants to internalize it, not being in some ashramic setting and stuff, I was like, well, I need to understand karma yoga and take it seriously. And so here's the thing. So if you don't mind, I spent many years trying to understand this. Now, whether I succeeded or not, that's for other people to judge.
Mhm.
But it seems to me you can boil karma yoga down into 3 things. Here's the first one. You're detached from the results of action. That's the core thing that Krishna says when he's trying to say to Arjuna, if you want to understand the difference between ordinary binding activities like karmic activities and karma yoga, the first thing is this. In karma yoga, you're detached from the results of action.
So could we define that as meaning when I act, my purpose, my intention is to do what's right as opposed to reaping a material benefit from
I think fundamentally that is it.
Okay.
In other words, the way I put it is this. Outcomes you have no control over have zero influence on your sense of the quality of your life.
Mm-hmm.
They have no influence on it.
So if
Yeah.
I'm a musician, I want to write an incredible song, and if I get no validation from it publicly, that's fine. It's complete. If I'm a furniture maker, I
Yep.
want to make an incredible piece of furniture for my own feeling of worth and contribution. This is a beautiful piece of furniture. It doesn't sell. Nobody buys it. No one cares less. Couldn't care less. But I've done it, and I'm detached from what other people think of me. Is that it?
I think that's basically it. And the idea is that and this to me, honestly, guys, like we were talking about, like if anyone is promoted as a spiritual teacher or something, here's the first thing you ask. If things outside their control bother them, then there's work to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
And this is also our way of gauging ourselves. Like this is basic Bhagavad-gita. And this is Karma Yoga step 1.
Nice.
Okay, now I want to be clear though, because I think this is one of the most misunderstood things about Karma Yoga, where people have said it means you don't care or something. One of the gurus in the 60s said, you just sit, right? And whatever happens, you don't care. Right? It's like, yeah, you care. Krishna says in the 18th chapter, he says that if you act with total disregard of what you're doing, he literally says that's tamasic. So the idea is this, it's not that you are a sociopath, but you are acutely focused on the distinction between what's in my control, what's outside my control. What's in my control? Surrendering to what's right. What's outside my control? Everything else.
Right.
If you surrender to doing what's right, that's the victory. That's the success. Things you can't control have zero influence on the success of the action. But so that's the first thing, right? So sometimes too, by the way, that's couched in the Gita as you're free from duality. What does it mean to be free from duality? Is that when you act and the goal is an outcome, now success and failure are built into that outcome. Therefore, if you get, like, if I act and I think there's an outcome I want, now there's duality because getting the outcome is happy, not getting the outcome is sad. Right. So detachment from the results of action and freedom from dualities are really the same thing, just described under 2 different banners.
I see. And actually, Krishna defines yoga as just that.
Samatvam yogam uchyate, 248. What is yoga? It's acting in the world but samatvam, with a balanced mind.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. But here, and this leads maybe to something like Raghu was saying a second ago, if the goal is not to grab outcomes, well, what motivates you? And here's something that I feel like, and you may not feel the same way, you two, but I feel like this is something that was not really focused upon, let's say, in ashramic settings. And there are, Krishna says in the Gita, at least 4 reasons why you should act even if you're a karma-yogi. Okay? Here's one of them. To preserve the world.
Okay.
You should care about the world. Krishna says this in the 3rd chapter. Loka samgraha is the Sanskrit. To preserve the world. In other words, why do you act? Because it's the world's worth preserving.
Even dharma is defined that way sometimes, right? That which sustains.
Right, it maintains the world.
Yeah.
Dharma maintains the world. So Krishna says one motivation for action is to appropriately preserve the world, to perpetuate things that are worth saving, you might say. Mm-hmm. Another thing he says is you act out of sacrifice, right? Now, what does it mean to act out of sacrifice? Act out of sacrifice means I've been benefited by a reality that's bigger than me, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm going to give back. I'm going to play my part in giving back. That's also a thing that motivates a karma yogi, where you don't have to be attached to the results. I'm going to give back. Now, if that works out or not, I can't control it. I'll just do the best I can. That's the success. You know? And so this is why, you know, in the 3rd and 4th chapter of the Gita, Krishna spends a lot of time talking about Vedic yajnas and sacrifices.
And actually speaking, in a sense, almost, I don't want to say against them, but
it's weird. What he does is he criticizes doing them for the results.
Right.
He endorses doing them in the spirit of gratitude and reciprocation. That's why he says, if you take from the world without giving back, you're a thief.
And he also uses that context to help understand how regular action, non-ritualistic action can be spiritual.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's the part of the Gita in the 4th chapter where there's really not a major distinction between ritualistic action and non-ritualistic. As long as what you're doing is within the bounds of dharma, you're not transgressing dharma. In other words, if it's morally appropriate, then it's something you can offer in karma yoga.
So he'll almost say, like, to put it in a modern context, you know, to care for your family, to care for your neighborhood, to, you know, in a detached way, is just like chanting a mantra and pouring the ghee into the fire.
Exactly, you know? Because those are just dharma too. Yeah. I mean, in a way, they're your daily sadhana. Your daily sadhana practices are just part of your, they're more like a specific kind of dharma, but they're within the broad, these are my roles. I think about dharma like role ethics. We all have roles in life. In my case, father, right? Teacher. Yeah. And I actually will, you know, whatever it is, like someone who's, you're embedded in the world in certain ways, and there are duties that are appropriate to that embeddedness. And those duties we could say are dharma, just to speak kind of broadly. And so, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway.
So we got the karma yogi is detached from the results of his actions or her actions. And then the second one?
Second thing is that what motivates, so if you're detached from the results, what motivates you? And it seems to me the Gita says there's 4 major motivations that play together. One is to preserve the world. One is to act out of sacrifice. One is to achieve yogic purification. One of my favorite verses in the Gita, I think it's 5:18, where Sri Krishna says, the yogis act with mind, I think, now I'm forgetting the details, but he basically has mind, body, and even the senses in order to become purified. Right. And so you also act for purification, because if you didn't
and let me just say that's significant, because people may conceive of spirituality as shutting down the senses.
Exactly. Where and the funny thing is that if you weren't testing yourself by engaging your senses in the world, you may not actually understand what you need to do to get better. Right? For Arjuna, it was a much greater test of his yogic character to have to act in the world than to turn away from the world. Right. So
that was 3. And the 4th one, I think I know the 4th one.
Hit me with it, baby.
Set the right example.
That's part of, believe it or not, that's part of
Want me to
maintaining
hit
the
you
world.
maybe one more time?
It's part of maintaining the world.
Okay. Oh, that's
Because-
part of maintaining the world. Okay. Then I
Yeah.
don't
So
know it.
basically, it's performing your dharma, maintaining the world, spirit of sacrifice, and yogic self-discovery are the four things that I would say. All of those things you can do without being attached to the results.
Gotcha. All right. So now that's karma yoga.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I just say one final thing on that?
say all you like. Yeah.
The other thing of karma yoga, though, is it's not just like the first two were about your motivations and what you're not motivated by, right? The results.
Mhm.
But the third thing is that you do practice reconceptualizing the world. Like that's part of it too. Like that's the inner work of karma yoga. My favorite commentator on the Gita, Sri Ramanuja, he says karma yoga includes jnana yoga. You just do it in your mind, but you're acting in the world. And so
is it he that defined karma yoga as a combination of jnana and action, or is that just a common understanding?
I think it's a fairly common thing.
Yeah.
But so the idea too is, we have entrenched some skaras that we see the world through them. And part of the work of karma yoga is we work on dissolving the ones that are obscuring what's really there. So that's part of the path, it seems to me. But
And
anyway,
so that was
just
the third aspect
thing,
of
third thing. That's the kind of internal, like conceptual change. Remember that, like that beautiful passage in chapter 2, the yogi sees, they live in two different realities, right? The yogi sees it as day, normal people see it as night, etc.
That's
Back and
the third
forth. It's
Now,
269.
now, this is I really would like to, since our time is getting short, but I think this is real important. Now, Raghunath and I, we've been doing this podcast, officially for a year, and we're doing it for even beyond that. And more and more people started listening. Now thousands of people are listening every day. And what we found, and I think you'll find this interesting, is that, we all had our ashram training, right? Raghunath and I, we had you as well. We had our ashram training. And maybe even a little bit, I think you're speaking a little bit to like what was missing from that training a bit, what may have been missing from that training. And
Particularly in terms of karma yoga and
but
rationality.
well, so my point is this, even a little, there can even be a little pride thinking, hey, I have this whole depth of spiritual experience and understanding. Other people don't have it. These years that I put in have me like leaps and bounds beyond other people.
Sure.
But what we discovered was that people that were listening to the podcast that were in their 30s and 40s and 50s, that had life experience, that had been married, that had children, that had divorces, that had tragedy or struggle in life,
Had to work through trauma, etc.
had to work through trauma,
Yeah.
went had the pleasures and the pains of life.
Yeah.
That as a background, when they grabbed onto, when they came to a certain point in their life saying there's got to be something more, they were very eager for it. And when the teachings of bhakti were accepted from that platform, it's almost like boom, there's a tremendous faith and depth of understanding that immediately takes place, so that life experience became like a really important part of the spiritual understanding.
Yeah, I think you're right. I can only say that, I think you're right. I don't have much more to add to that, except that one thing that's interesting is that, the Gita is trying to give a kind of practice for anyone, right? And anyone means that you could be situated in almost any sphere. But part of being able to practice things like bhakti or karma yoga, incidentally, we don't have a lot of time. My understanding is that karma yoga and bhakti yoga are things you can do concurrently. It's not like a ladder, right? They're just different phases. In fact, one scholar of the Gita threw up his hands and stopped trying to distinguish the yogas. And he just said, there's Gita yoga, which is basically karma yoga and bhakti yoga.
Bhakti yoga performed through social responsibility.
Well, both, or just concurrently.
Yeah.
Like Sri Ramanuja, by the way, sees karma yoga is like you're doing this activity in the world and you're offering it to God and things like that. And then you sit down and do this kind of deeper inner meditation, which is a kind of visualization of Bhagavan along with other things. So his idea of bhakti might be very meditative, but you can put them together. In any case, what I'm getting at is, I I can only say personally in my life, I think the idea, like being a developed human who tries to practice these things, you can take them you can go deep with them. And maybe part of us growing up too is having the human experiences that could go alongside with the kind of early ashramic idealism or something. And part of that together helps. I tried, by the way, to see the early ashramic. I try to look at it with gratitude, even though I do see a lot of limitations, honestly, particularly when it comes to intellectual responsibility, to be honest with you. I see a lot lacking in that sense. But I think I was given a great gift, which is taking the Gita very seriously by people who tried to live it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Raghu's with you on that too.
Yeah.
As we wind up, Mahamuni, Professor Mahamuni, something practical. You got 2 teenagers.
Yeah.
How do you go out of your way to shelter them from the crazy material world? Do you throw your hands up and say, you know what, these kids are good, I trust them? What do you do to steer your kids in the right direction?
Few things. One is, and
Parents want to know.
I hope this doesn't come off too harshly. Nobody in my house uses social media. Nobody, including me.
And you lay down that law?
It's not harsh. And I'll tell you something honestly. No. I'll tell you something. One of my happiest moments as a father, a year ago, my daughter, who was at that point 12, said to me, "Dad, I want to thank you because I have so many friends who are addicted to their phones. Thank you." This is, and as a parent, you don't get that as a parent very much.
Thank you.
Because she has friends, you're riding on the bus, friends who are literally glued to their phone, who can't. And so I'll just tell you right now, our view so far, I mean, it might come to the point where they're demanding it and we have to negotiate. But I'll tell you part of it is my wife and I find it tedious. No, and I'm not trying to be preachy or mean or anything, but I can't think of anything that contributes more to chitta vritti than social media. That's me.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I know you got to use it, guys. It's Facebook. Hello, Facebook, whatever. But so I'll just tell you, that's one thing. So maybe you know this already, but young women, I have 2 young girls who use social media for more than an hour and a half a day, maybe 2 hours a day. Their rates of depression skyrocket. The data is in, guys. There's no debate about this.
I'm not arguing with you, baby.
No, I'm preaching to the world, not you.
Okay.
So I honestly, I think in our world, having a serious talk with your kids about now, if they're going to use it, at least explaining to them these facts and saying, if you're going to use this, we're going to have a way to help you use it in a way that's thoughtful. Honestly, that was something important to us. Another thing I found too, Raghunath, is that I know you can't always do this when they're younger, but my kids are now like tweens. I can talk to them about things that even I don't fully understand my view on and explain to them how I'm seeing it right now. Like if it's, let's say, some social issue or some debate in society about something, and I could say, well, here's why it makes sense, but here's the things I'm worried about, right? And I think kids are often smarter than we think. So I don't know if that helped. Do you want to go further into that, Raghunath? Or?
No, I appreciate that.
So
That's a great thing, and I think it's I've kept them at arm's distance from social media as well. My daughter, who's turned 15, she has it now.
Yeah, well, that's it. You held off for a while.
We did held off till 15. But even that, we regulate the time, and I think. As a parent, you're like, well, we got to regulate it, but it's the fact is we have to regulate it. I have to regulate it.
Actually, can I say?
Me think I'm like above controlling my senses and mind, and
well, that's a good thing when you're a parent, realizing like, oh my God, am I becoming that hypocrite parent? It's a pretty good motivator to like be serious. Can I say one thing we did, Raghu, a very practical thing? We have a place in our house where you put your phones where you're not using them, and that includes the parents.
Love it.
And it creates a culture where it's like you go to the phone, you use the phone, and you put it back. And so that's a really small thing that's been useful for our family.
Thank you for
Love that.
Hey, can we just maybe have one more question before we?
I'm happy to chat. I'm not.
Okay. Well, we have on the chat board one of our regular listeners and friends, and a philosopher in her own right, Athena. She's asking in response to what's that?
I love your name, Athena.
I was gonna say that's a Greek name, probably, right?
Yeah, Athens.
Yeah.
Athens was named it. Yeah. Keep going.
Yes. So, I believe this was in response to your first facet of the karma yoga being detached from the results of action. And you mentioned if someone's like a spiritual teacher or something like
Yeah.
that, we could kind of use as a bit of a litmus test, I suppose.
Yeah. Yes, I will say yes unashamedly.
But my point is this, the litmus test you're saying is if they become disturbed by things that are beyond their control.
Just realize my point isn't to shoot down people who are sincere spiritual teachers. My point is to say, I think again, like people's experiences are different. I think people like us, Raghu and Kaustubha, we were people who thought if you want to go for it, you leave your life and go to some ashram or something.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's different. The kind of culture of yoga, which has come really into the fore in the last couple decades, has made things a little differently, where there's spiritual teachers who are not necessarily big gurus or something.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Her point or question had to do with what about the role of emotion, particularly when you're talking about bhakti?
Yeah.
That someone I might be is there room for that person? What's the difference between someone experiencing genuine experiences, even of anger, say, as a bhakti yogi? How does that fit in with your definition of the karma yogi?
Yeah. So this is my understanding is that part of our being holistic human beings is we have emotions. So it's not that, like when Krishna says freedom from duality, he doesn't mean like you have a general anesthesia that covers everything in existence, right? That's a mistake.
Okay.
Right. So
then what's the distinction?
So the distinction is, anger in particular is a difficult one, because anger, one way you could understand anger is devesha, like the word devesha in Sanskrit, which means like revulsion. Raga is attachment, devesha is revulsion. Krishna says clearly a yogi does not engage in raga and devesha. He says it repeatedly.
Yes.
Right? So I guess we'd have to understand the context.
He'll say attachment too, but then we have a whole philosophy built on attachment.
Well, that's correct, but the challenge is that in the Gita he says attachment, but then he gives other examples of sorts of attachments. For example, even acting out of sacrifice is gratitude and appreciation. Those are emotions. Those are part of the culture of reciprocity that Krishna says a yogi engages in the 3rd chapter of the Gita. So what I'm getting at is anger is a particularly challenging one, because I do think like injustice is something that we should be dissatisfied with. Maybe it comes down to the kind of thing, if the anger is something which inhibits your ability, let's put it like this, maybe we should use the gunas. So sattva guna is when you, goodness or whatever, is when you engage the world very clearly. You see the world, you take it in.
Okay.
Right? Rajaguna or passion is when you have a very narrow bandwidth because of your attachments, that you're deeply focused on a very narrow bit of reality. So if injustice is something that outrages us, and that makes us become myopic and imbalanced, it's getting in the way of yoga. If it's something that simply inspires us in a way that is consistent with the kind of serenity we would expect of deep yoga practice, then it seems like it's not something which is necessarily unhealthy. But definitely I think Athena's right that I don't think the yoga of the Bhagavad-gita is just to be like emotionally dead or something. That's such a mistake. But if those emotions take us out of that serenity, I don't know if that's going to be long-term healthy. Can I just give you an obvious example?
Sure.
Just like getting outraged, like getting angry all day by watching media about politicians who disgust us is not helping you or the world.
Right.
Even if I agree with your disgust.
Right.
Right? So, and I know people who are like, but if you're not always outraged, it's like a moral failure. It's like, well, enjoy your morality. Good luck, buddy.
Okay.
I want to live a fulfilling life.
Right.
So I don't know. Does that help? Do you want to go further? Either of you? Would you like to complement that, or you want
I
to?
found that helpful. Thank you for that. And Raghunath is in his daily position of trying to give up the music.
Trying to start my phone right. Come on. It's like every song will start except the one I want
Mamuni, thank you so
to.
much for spending this time with us.
Hey, I enjoyed spending time. I hope it was
Get it.
helpful or interesting.
It was great.
I enjoyed
It was great.
chatting with you guys.
Yeah. Hang on. This is the dance
It
part.
was,
And you're the only one really dressed for
it
the
was
occasion.
fantastic. I got to dress better. That's what it might take away. I got to say, who cares? And I got to dress better. I need to scrub up a little, Kaustubha. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on a Sunday morning. We have Madhu doing something today, right?
Yeah, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Yeah, 6 p.m. Bhakti Q&A with Madhu.
6 p.m. Eastern.
If you're a Patreon member, and if you're not, you better become one right now. Patreon.com/Wisdom of the Sages. You can support us. It's a community-supported podcast, and we offer tons of classes, yoga classes, yoga workshops. And today, our good friend Madhu, he's excellent speaker, kirtan leader, Ayurvedic dude. He's giving a Q&A today at 6 o'clock. You can join him. He also is offering this thing where he gives private consultations for free. At least the first one's for free. And if you want that, you just got to write us at Wisdom of the Sages 108 and put Madhu in the subject matter, and we'll forward it to him. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on Zoom. Thanks for Professor Matthew Dasti Mahamuni, my old friend. Great to see you. And now,
Thanks for inviting me,
this
guys.
is where we
Take care.
transcend.
This is
where
dance
we
game.
transcend the body. This is our dance show. Because when you
The
really
professor's
boil
dance.
down life, you just got to sing and dance a little more, right? All this philosophy will just stay up here. We really need to just sing a little.